Hi, Joel here. Welcome to episode 7, week 17 of my pre-production for my Values Exchange podcast and me continuing to say stuff into 2021 as part of my journey of accountability. Again, thank you for being here with me, and if this is your first time, I hope that this is going to be something fun and a bit of a learning moment. If not, or even if it is, but I would hope that you would still maybe subscribe, comment, follow, interact with video in some way or another, because all of it helps me continue to grow on my journey here. Now, the actual podcast itself is still in abeyance. It's still not any closer. I mean, it is closer than it was before. I mean, everything in that sense is relative. Every conversation I have, every thing that I do in its service and in the right direction brings me closer. But I think, like I touched on in previous weeks, there is a feeling that I can probably offer even more, make even more of the conversations that I am going to be having. And I suppose as well making more of the situations that I find myself in personally, and how to better synthesize the learning from my own life and some of the experiences that are happening at the moment into the content that can then help other people have a better understanding of their own value matrix, and where things are of different levels of import and meaning to them in their lives. But at least to my own understanding of what I'm doing, and after last week's episode where I talked particularly about luck and whether or not we are the creators of our own luck, or whether or not it's something that we find, it's made me think that actually I would like to maybe do that a little bit more. And that framework of how I changed the conversation to start with the quote and then talk on it rather than talk and then finish with a quote, maybe it kind of worked for me, because it made me realize that quote can sometimes then better frame the rest of what I want to talk about. And so to that point, yes, today I thought to myself, what I will just kind of talk about is the values and how, or my particular values, and how they frame and shape my own life. And particularly today, I just want to talk about the joint or shared value, or at least how it's perceived to me, of kind of accountability and transparency, and how that value through my life is what is in essence propelled me to now being a sustainable, as close as possible to a whole food, plant-based vegan, and that is obviously also the life of my family, and my nearest and dearest. It's not something that I just kind of see as it's a me thing only. It's very important that it is, and also part of the life of my children, my wife, those around me, because of it being such an important value to me. So yeah, I just kind of want to touch on how accountability and transparency, in my interpretation, led to veganism for me. I think what better way to start really than with a quote which I'm going to give as uncredited where I found it. But it's this: authenticity requires a certain measure of vulnerability, transparency, and integrity. Simple quote really, but so simple that it says so much. Because ultimately what I recognize is that the journey that I'm on with all of the values that I will discuss, that will be brought into discussion, and that ultimately what we're all on a journey towards, or we're searching for, in my mind, is that authenticity. Authenticity is the state in which you maybe find yourself as a result of living a life of purpose and through your values, because you then become authentic, as the quote says, through your vulnerability, transparency, and integrity, which meld together to create an authentic self. And so yeah, it is that in that search for authenticity for myself that I suppose I recognized accountability here as I am talking on these videos, again not having any conscious filter on, but this kind of streaming my stream of consciousness from me, because I feel that there is nothing that I have to hide, that speaking freely in the life that I have been building for myself, a life of purpose, a life of meaning, shouldn't have any like tripwires or gotcha moments, because ultimately I am trying to find my needle in my, like, you know, my moral compass, my internal compass, as close to the true north as possible. So to my point now about how this led to me becoming vegan, I think it's important that I explain how I've always framed the view of my accountability or transparency has been through the lens of I don't want to be a hypocrite. Now what I mean by that is, what I don't like is, in any situation, something that you stand for in one facet or perspective in your life is something that you don't in another. So for example, like for me personally, I find it very strange when I hear people describe themselves as animal lovers, but yet they eat animals. Because I'm like, well, you're a meat lover, not an animal lover. And then when people go, oh no, but I love like you know, dogs and horses, but those other ones are meat. And I'm like, well then, you can't differentiate and say that some animals aren't animals and some are. Like, that to me is a position of hypocrisy. You either love animals and therefore you don't harm them at all, or you love meat and then you eat meat, but then you don't have anything to say in the conversation about the well-being of animals, or not with any good conscience anyway, because, you know, you're holding two different positions at the same time. And so this is what I mean. This is what kind of made me become vegan, because I recognized in myself that, like, I was also one of those people here in the UK, like, you know, brought up, like, you know, like Western propagandized to look at people eating obscure animal flesh, or bushmeat as it's sometimes called around the world, whether or not that be, like, you know, dogs in the Far East, whether or not that be snakes or other animals across, like, Africa, Asia, crocodiles, kangaroos that they eat in Australia, all sorts. But I mean, all of them would at one point be met with a kind of turn up of the nose and like, well, I can't believe that people eat those things. But I mean, I then had to take that real step back and be like, well, it's quite a hypocritical position to take, because ultimately it is a living being, another animal, that all it is that in some regions some animals are indigenous and in other regions they're not. I think the reason why we find it so odd and so strange, even the concept of consuming a crocodile or a kangaroo in the UK or in Europe, is because those animals aren't indigenous around here. There's not really an option to have had them, or for them to have been part of cultural tradition and to be brought forward. And so, I mean, it really becomes quite obvious when you understand the nature of human migration and evolution, and then the geopolitical nature of, like, how things have ended up and, like, landed, that you see that in certain regions they eat certain things and in other regions they don't. But then, yeah, what struck me was that how people make these judgments on people, on their character, on who they are and what their culture means, based on the things that they may do or consume, but taking it into no consideration at all, you know, the literally the geographical difference, the ecological environmental difference. It's just taken at face value as, like, these people are this because they do that, and that same thought or approach can't be leveled at me because we do things the normal way. I think I started to realize quite young, whether it was from religion, whether it was from currency, whether or not it was even from language, that I started to recognize that everybody in their own language, in their own cultural setting, in their own ethnic understanding, sees how they do things as correct or right, or this is how it's always been done. But then how other people do it is now seen as other. And what I recognized was this great othering, while it may have served our ancestors and many of our ancestors really well to better understand what was a threat, who is an enemy, like, you know, this idea of other to protect, like, you know, self. I think that there is no two ways about it. In a world that has so many elements of it globalized, and the understanding that we are one big human family should at least in the newer generations who are at the forefront of that hyper-globalization through social media and through these other means by which we can now communicate in milliseconds to everybody around the world, should in good conscience be spelling the end or dispelling some of these like kind of like cultural traditions which serve to paint some cultures or some people as more primitive than others, when ultimately in the scheme of things, again, us as humans, I think this is something I also touched on, because of the short length of our own lives, you know, maximum really of like what 100 120 years at max for somebody, means that we can't see things like, you know, at a grander scale because our life doesn't really allow it. If we were, for example, like 1,000 years old, I mean, obviously everything would change, so this analogy might start to like fall apart immediately. But the point being is that you would see that things are changing like at a different rate than we maybe imagine, where we think that things aren't happening quickly enough because of how short our lives are. But in the grand scheme of things, things are actually changing really quickly. It'd be really interesting actually to watch. Similar to when recently people create a lot of those kind of like those visual data graphics where it will show the population growing over a period of time, or the richest person in the world, and you watch it like literally in real time, starting from say 1900, or the wealth of a nation, and they just measure the GDP each year, and you watch as they like to overtake, slow down, and all of a sudden, whoa, one overtakes. Watching one of those for like human cultural evolution would be fascinating, because we would see that so many of the things that we think of as unique to certain groups, certain people, actually are not, that they are, again, part of our human story. But hubris has made us perceive things the way that we do, and to then kind of compound that hubris even more to make us become these like, you know, these false sovereign ideas based around like old tales and narratives we told ourselves in a time when we didn't understand things properly. Where am I going with all this and the relevance of it back to my value of accountability and transparency? I think a conversation I had yesterday talking about like even interpersonal relationships between men and women. I just remember the line that stuck with me that one of my female like friends said to me was, "When you know better, do better." And again, I think that very well, like, you know, surmises like, you know, the point that I'm making about this accountability and transparency and how to not be a hypocrite. The moment you know, you should be able to act on what you know. So for me, the moment that I recognized that there were, for example, elements of my behavior that made women, that made other people, but particularly like, you know, like women feel maybe like, you know, a sense of dis-ease, or like, you know, unsafe, unsure, whether that be literally something as simple as when you're walking on the road, if you're walking behind a woman on the road, that before I didn't think about it, but as I said, once you know better, do better. Once it became more apparent that, like, you know, that the how the phrase was that we don't know which man it is, and so we have to be protective of all men. And so even if in my own mind I was like, well, I would never do anything, it made me become more aware that, wow, well, the fact that women in, like, you know, moments like this, when they're walking by themselves on a street, for a park or wherever, feel a sense of fear that, like, you know, that my presence, it feels like it's potentially looming behind them because I'm walking in the same direction, well, then it's not so hard for me to make the decision to walk a little different, or change my direction a bit to kind of, it doesn't in any way harm me, make anything more difficult for me, but it makes something feel better for somebody else, so why not do it? Similarly, yeah, as I said, that was my thought with going vegan. It's my thought with so many things, that the moment that you recognize that the way that you're maybe doing something, I mean, most recently I would probably say that adding my pronouns, for example, in my email signature and on my social media. Now, some friends and some people, they kind of ask me, like, why do you need to do that? Isn't it quite obvious that you're male, or that you're a man, that you don't make that you cast no aspersions or there's no illusion about who you are. But I'm like, but it's not about me. It's just something simple that I can do, knowing better, doing better, that helps other people who they don't see their their gender identity through the binary lens, which I'm happy to accept. It's worked for me, but it doesn't for other people. And so who am I to say that, like, you know, I don't want to, like, you know, well, that's not what I understand. Because again, back to that hypocrisy for me, like, if anybody was to anybody non-black, you know, in this world was to start talking about what I do or don't need as a black person, I'd be like, how dare you? The only thing that I require from you is solidarity with how I feel, because it's my experience, not yours. And so similarly, if I realize that if that's what I expect from other people, well, that's what I also want to, and I want to be able to give that, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to be out here saying to people like, well, I think you should be respecting my rights as a black person, respecting my rights as an African of the diaspora, respecting my hair, all of the things that I believe to be sovereign about myself. That I want someone to notice and hold those things in esteem or in a certain lens, but then I'm not going to afford somebody that same respect. Doesn't make sense to me. And so on every single facet, especially where these things don't affect, like, you know, my life, but they empower somebody else's, I just feel that it's incumbent on me to do those things. And I think that just kind of ties back to, accountability and transparency. I would like to think of my life and as an analogy here has been like a blockchain, or been like this new technology that I want people to be able to, and myself included, to be able to look back across the whole history of my life and all of the vignettes, all of the anecdotes and stories that have made me who I am, but be able to go through them, like, you know, with my daughter, with my wife, with my family, with anybody, and not feel embarrassed about what I have done at any point, that I didn't make any decision or do anything that I would want to hide or not want people to know was part of my decision making process. I want to be that open book. I want to be transparent and accountable, because I believe that once we as people can get ourselves to that kind of state where, I mean, ultimately, from a biblical sense, it's all the way back to pre-Apple been bitten, because in essence, what I'm saying is I'm happy to be naked, and I just wish that everybody was happy to be naked, because currently everybody is hiding their nudity, and in hiding their nudity, the insecurity, the violence, all of the issues that have come into our life and that we have, ultimately are from the fact that we're scared and we're hiding. But if we can educate ourselves to get to a place where we're no longer scared and hiding, well, then I think that, we will have made it to a place that we can have honest and open conversations, and that all of the other values that frame and fulfill our lives will become more apparent because of the truthful nature of the conversations we're able to have. So that's it for me for another week. As I've mentioned also previously, I am filming from my daughter's bedroom window, and I can see that my wife and daughter are back outside, and so I am going to go and open the front door for them. But I hope that this little conversation about the values of accountability and transparency, how they help me to become vegan and hold myself to better account in my own life and avoid hypocrisy, have been of some value. So for me and from Violet, it's another week out, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks and bye.